we're live. Hopefully, everything's good. It says live right up there. I'm alive. We got a lot of living things here. My name is Daniel Miller. I'm at the Spiral Gardens Community Food Security Project and just wanted to do the next in a series of live stream classes we're doing, trying to get information out there about how to grow food and how to grow beneficial plants and how to grow plants in general. This is part of an education series that we're doing. Because of COVID, we're having a hard time doing the classes that we normally do in the site. So, forced, but also kind of excited to use technology now to get a lot of this information out there. So there's going to be a lot of this coming. I personally am doing a class every Thursday right now at 3 p.m. If you can't make it then, they will be archived here. Eventually, we'll be archiving it on the YouTube channel too for folks who don't do Facebook as much. But yeah, I'm here, Spiral Gardens, 2850 Sacramento Street in Southwest Berkeley. We are open to the public for sales in our nursery here every Saturday and Sunday right now from 10 to 5 p.m. and open for people who want to participate and volunteer Tuesday through Friday from noon to 5. We'll be doing that through November, December, January. We'll be taking a break, reopening up in February. And so you can sign up for volunteering at info@spiralgardens.org. You can also just come in during those times. And also on Facebook, there's an event that happens on Wednesdays. We have Racial Justice Wednesday, so you can sign up there on that event if you'd like to participate in that. So anyway, that's just a little intro, who we are, where we are. I'm doing this by myself today, so I've got the camera sitting over there. Hopefully things are doing well. I'm going to try to get the video up right now. It's great. And then let me hopefully things are turn the volume down. And then just get it up, make sure that I can see comments. I didn't see them last time. Let me see. Let me do a little test here to make sure that I can see them. Yes. So I can see them right there. That is excellent. So yeah, this is going to be interactive. Please put your questions and your comments in here, and I will do my best to keep an eye on it as we go along. Because even if we can't be in person, I definitely want to interact, be able to answer questions. That's my favorite part about teaching a class. So today's topic is pests and diseases in the garden. A lot of people are making vegetable gardens now, and it's a lot more than usual because of COVID and quarantine, stay-at-home stuff. A lot more people are at home, and a lot more people are working in their gardens. I'd say from our estimates here in the nursery and farm, it seems like 5 times more people, I could say probably without exaggerating, are growing food at home right now. And we don't want that to just be a blip. We want people to be able to succeed, right? So we talked a lot about in the previous classes about what plants to plant at given times of year here, and what's, most specifically, what's good to plant now. Then after that, we talked about the soil and the fertility, which is a big part of healthy plants. And now, today, I want to talk about some of the things that can go wrong, because those things are going to happen. And we want to make sure that you're not discouraged by that you know what to do. So there's certain pests, certain diseases that happen because you're growing food. Food is good to eat, right? And it's had a volunteer show up. So food is good to eat. You like to eat it. Other things are going to like to eat it too. And you're leaving that food outside. So, to expect that food to sit out there and not get eaten, well, that's probably not going to happen. So, yeah, we could probably jump right into it and talk about specific things. So, in the vegetable garden, in the Bay Area, one of the first things we can talk about is slugs and snails. they're going to be one of the #1 things that try to eat your food. And slugs, I think slugs have been here. I don't know if they were brought. I know that the garden snail that we have a problem with is the European brown snail. And it was brought here by, I guess we blame it on French people who like to eat them. And they brought them here to eat. And then at some point, culturally, they stopped eating them as much. And they're all over the place now. And the Bay Area and environments like this are really good for them because we're not too hot. And even though we're dry for a good portion of the year, the air is really humid, so it's not going to desiccate them as much as it might in some other places. And you're watering in your garden a lot, which creates a nice, moist environment for them in order to do their snail or slug thing. Especially even more slugs because they don't have that shell that they can retreat into and seal up when things get dry. So snail damage, you'll see as big chunks of your plant missing. Now, there's a few things that will make chunks of your plants missing, but generally snail damage you can tell because it tends to be kind of circular, kind of lobed holes in the thing. And the real telltale for snail damage is that there'll be glistening silver tracks afterwards because they kind of creep along. They always leave a little trail, at least most of the time. If you're not sure if it's snails, the best way to go out is check in the middle of the night, or at least late after dark, when things have gotten moist and cool. That's when they'll come out. That's when you see them. So you won't see them during the day most of the time unless you happen to find them under a leaf or under a rock or something like that where they're hiding during the day. But generally, if you go out at night with a flashlight, you'll see if that's who's eating your plants. So I can't move around too much today to walk around and show you stuff because I'm keeping the camera stationary because I'm not blessed by someone filming me today, but we're just going to sit here and talk about it. So what do you do about slugs and snails? There's a lot of different things you can do. There's a lot of things that people have done in the past, and I'll talk about some of those. I think first, probably straight up. Should I do it first or last? I'm not sure. Well, let's just go through the whole thing. So the most direct method for doing, nope, that's me. The most direct method for getting rid of them is when you go out at night to check if they're there, just to pick them up. You can see them, there they are. A lot of pest problems, you can just like directly pluck the pest off. A lot of times there may be too many of them and they may keep recurring. But yeah, go out at night and if you see them, pick them. Snails, of course, are going to be easier because you can grab them by the shell and it's not as gross. If you pluck off a snail, it's pretty nasty. Excuse me, slug. It's pretty nasty. They are very slimy. It's hard to get a hold of them. They tend to like slip out of your fingers and stuff. So, you know what? I'm actually going to put this iPad down because I can see the chat well enough on the camera there. So, yeah, you can do that. One of the more popularly known things that people talk about doing is beer. They put beer out in little dishes and leave it out for the slugs and snails to kind of get attracted to, I guess, because of the yeast or maybe the alcohol. I don't really know what they're after in it. And they tend to die and drown in it. I found that, I've tried that a lot. I found that to not be the most effective method. You will get some slugs and snails that drown in there, or die in there, however they're dying. But you won't get all of them. You'll just get the ones who like beer, basically. If you're going to use beer, I'd say it's more effective just to go out at night, drink the beer, and pick the slugs and snails, and get rid of them more directly that way. But you can try it. You can see if it works. This is just my experience. What I've come to is definitely, I'm still learning as we go. So whatever you'd like to try or figure out if it works for you, by all means, go for it. So that's one way to kind of, that has been used to try to lure and kill them. A lot of the other things I know are actually more deterrents than actually killing them, like putting things around the plant to to hurt them or discourage them. One thing that I have used that actually works that way is crushed oyster shells. You can mainly get them at feed supply places. They sell them for chickens so that the chickens can have enough calcium for their eggs. So you can get them like Biofuel Oasis down here or any feed store, get some crushed oyster shells. And you have to have like a complete little barrier of the oyster shells around it. And that will physically deter the snails from going over. I guess it's kind of like hard and sharp for them to go across. But the problem with that is you have to keep them in place. Uh, they won't move so much when you water them too badly. So that's a good thing about that particular deterrent. But you know, this chaos, things tend to move, things fall on it, and keeping your garden covered with crushed oyster shells is, you know, a little exotic, a little difficult to maintain, but it is a relatively good deterrent. We used to, back in the day, we used to also use cocoa husks or cocoa mulch, which we were able to get at the time. I haven't seen it as much. That would deter snails and slugs temporarily, but not forever, because within like a week or two of watering it tends to kind of rot and mold and become less deterrent. And that again is a pretty exotic material. Putting it in the garden. Speaking of mulch on the garden is great, and it's for another subject, but mulch on the garden can be really good for keeping moisture in the garden and adding to the soil and for suppressing weeds, but it also becomes a really good habitat for slugs and snails. So those two things are at odds in the Bay Area for using mulch for all its good benefits, but then attracting slugs and snails. So those are some of the things that, you know, are some of the more common things that people go for slugs and snails, besides like poison bait that you can get from a garden center or a hardware store. The traditional poison baits I'm not a fan of because you're putting poison outside and other animals could eat it. I don't know what types of poisons they put in those kind of snail baits, but how long they last or whatever. It just doesn't seem like a good idea to me. What I like to use, it's not necessarily product placement, but it works for me. I've got this on selfie cam right now, so everything's going to be backwards to you. And if I was somehow be able to use the video camera directly, it would be good. So this is Slugo. For you guys, it looks like ogles, ogles, but it's Slugo is what it's called. And this is an organic method for killing slugs and snails, and this is pretty much my go-to right now. So, you know, I prefer when there's just regular materials that you can use for these kind of things, but sometimes people develop something that really works. And this does kill slugs and snails by them eating it. But the thing that kills them that's in here is iron phosphate. And so iron phosphate is just simple nutrients for plants, and they're not harmful to us. They're not harmful to wildlife. See, they have a little picture of a dog and a cat on there. This stuff, it looks kind of like, there you go, you can see it. It looks kind of like Greek orzo. It's just these, let's see if we can do this, yeah. It's just these little tiny pellets like this. And they have it in some sort of substrate that the slugs and snails like to eat. You need to get it wet to apply it, but when they eat it, apparently when a slug or a snail eats iron phosphate, they basically get a fatal stomach ache from it. It kills them somehow. And then when they die and rot, that actually just, instead of adding poison to the garden, it adds nutrients to your garden. Plants need iron, they need phosphates. So it's harmless to anybody but mollusks who might eat it. So it's harmful to slugs and snails. The only other thing in that category that you might get in your garden is the native snail, which I like. I think they're really cute. They don't really hurt plants nearly as much. But if you have other habitats in your garden that you're not using Slugo on, hopefully those guys will be fine. I use Slugo around here, but I still find native slugs and snails. So I'm not so worried about that. I am worried about them destroying your plants, because snails and slugs can be bad enough. Like if you put a seedling out, they could destroy it overnight and eat most of it, or at least do so much damage or make it so unsightly that won't want to eat it. So yeah, that's my go-to among all those other methods. This Slugo. You can get it in this little 1 pound thing, or you, for better value, it's 2.5 pounds. We sell it here. Again, I'm not trying to do product placement, but I'm just saying what works for us. And so yeah, it's those little pellets. The way I like to use it is I water the garden, get it nice and wet, some droplets on the leaves, and then I just lightly sprinkle it around the plants, not too much. And then I also sprinkle it where there's habitat that the slugs and snails might be. If there's a place they can get under a board, or some kind of dark, damp place, a cluster of dense foliage near your vegetable garden, because that's where the snails will be hanging out. The slugs can actually get into the soil and just come right up at night. But snails actually have to have some place that they hide, usually under something, someplace dark. So I like to toss it in those places. And then when it gets wet, it gets soft enough for them to eat it. It will rot over a period of a week and then not be there anymore. And if it doesn't get eaten by a slug or snail, then it'll just, again, become plant nutrients for the garden. But yeah, it works really well. I like it here in the nursery and the farm. I use it, you know, maybe twice a year, 3 times a year, do kind of a thorough coverage of the whole place. And then I don't really need to worry about it most of the year. And if I see them reoccurring, then I'll do it. Around the rainy season is a good time to really get on it with that, because that's a good time for slugs and snails and the time where they'll breed and come out a lot more often. So if you can keep the population down, so I do it like right when the rains start, I do it when the rains end, and then I'll do it maybe mid-year sometime in the summer, or whenever you see damage. Pretty much cuts slugs and snails out of the equation. So I'm really grateful to have an organic solution for what it can be such a persistent problem. So that's one, is slugs and snails. Let's talk about another pest. Well, there's a lot of pests we can talk about. Um, let's talk about rodents next, because that seems to be a really big one lately. So a lot of people are dealing with rodents. There seems to be a real surge in the population of rats in the city. And it seems like, I mean, it's always been a thing with humanity, but it seems like in maybe the last 4 or 5 years, it's become a bigger issue. Some people associated with that drought we had back then, maybe they moved more out of the perimeter and more into cities looking for water and food. I don't know the reason. You know, sometimes I associate it with the gentrification around here. It's like more, there's less stray cats and more cats going to the pound. Then we don't have the predators that are the natural population control. We don't have, in the city generally, we don't have coyotes and foxes and the things that would keep rodents down. So it has been cats, stray cats. We used to, up until about that time, we used to have a tomcat. It was like a stray tomcat that would take territory on the nursery. One would take territory over on the farm. And they generally kept the population down. We haven't had that so much for a while. So, if you see a stray cat and you take pity on it, you might also want to think about, rodent populations and maybe, give it a little food, but let it be out there. Anyway, so they're actually a really good solution for it. But the way you notice rodent damage is it's usually the whole stem of something is just severed, rather than just little isolated holes in the leaves. There can be some chewing that happens, but generally they'll do enough damage, especially the small seedlings, that they'll just sever it at the stem. And not many other things can do that. If a seedling is small enough, a snail could do that for a really small seedling. But if you think of any size, they couldn't. So that's usually a telltale sign that you have rodents. They also dig a lot at night and can dig things up, not necessarily eat them, but just sort of toss them aside. I think they're either going for water or they're going for like burrowing insects or worms that they're trying to find in there. And your nice, recently disturbed garden soil, it's nice and soft and moist. maybe to them indicates that there's like a bunch of earthworms in there, that must have been doing that. Because in the wild, that's generally how a soil would be in that condition. So they go in there and they dig and they disrupt your stuff. There's bigger things that will dig up your garden too, like raccoons are a real candidate for that. But small amounts of damage. It's rats, mice will do that. So for me, I've tried pretty much everything to try to deal with them. And beyond having a good resident cat, I've come back to just simple snap traps for them. And a lot of people don't like to kill things, but if you're actually trying to feed yourself, leaving your food outside your garden, if the rat eats it, you're not going to get it. So good old simple, hello Lorraine, how you doing? Good old simple wooden snap traps work well. And just getting into the nitty gritty of it, I bait them with a little peanut butter, and then I take a little piece of bacon, put it on the peanut butter, and then I tie that on some like fine string or some thread or something like that. Even a twisted tie will do it. And that holds it all together so that when the rat or the mouse try to take that bait off and eat it, it's sure to hold and trigger the trap. And it works. It's sad, but there's not supposed to be that many of them because there's supposed to be something eating them. We don't have predators. You got to become it. When you're really trying to sustain and feed yourself, sometimes you got to do that kind of stuff. And one more tip on trapping rats and mice is that if you're worried about a dog or a cat or something else triggering that trap, what I tend to do is take a milk crate and put it over, especially those longer milk crates. I put it over the trap and then I'll put something heavy on top of that. And so the rodent can make it in the little handle on the ground, get in there, but most bigger things can't. So I found for my dogs that keeps it pretty safe because they'd probably be pretty attracted to that bacon if they could get to it. But I haven't seen them trigger trap when they've had it that way. So, we're on the subject of animals as pests in here, and then we'll get to diseases after that. The birds can also be a problem in a garden, especially with small seedlings or seeds. If you're direct seeding into a garden, a lot of times birds will somehow figure it out. They'll go in there and, flocks of them in the morning, generally earlier than you wake up, will go in there and dig them all up and eat those seeds. Or sometimes they scratch just trying to get worms, just like the rodents do. And you can usually tell bird damage because it's more of a tear. So we've been through snails, which is more like circular holes with slime trails. Rodents, where it's pieces gone, but then like actual stems snipped. And then birds, it's more like the edges torn off. Now it's a really small seedling that would just kind of take the whole thing. But generally, you can tell bird damage by that tearing. Like if I'm growing salad greens over there, it looks like someone kind of just ripped all the tops off the leaves and ate some, sort of browsed. Liza says she has a squirrel who has taken up residence and is digging up my garden to hide its nuts. Yeah, squirrels, man, pain in the butt. A lot of people think they're cute. I think they're little menaces now when they do that. So to keep a squirrel away is pretty difficult. I'm actually pretty convinced that they're planting their nuts rather than hiding them because a lot of times they'll come back for them and I'll see a little walnut, tree growing up there afterwards. So, so for a squirrel, one of the main things I do is if I see them, because they'll actually be out in the daylight, is I just scream and yell and try to scare them off, throw little things at them. I've trapped them with have-a-heart traps and relocated them, although then I'm just giving somebody else the problem. And it seems like another squirrel just kind of moves back in if I do that. You could maybe try putting something over the ground, even pieces of cardboard with rocks, to hold them down, to just not give them access to the soil. It's probably the most direct solution you can do, unless you're willing to get yourself an old copy of Joy of Cooking. They don't have them anymore in the modern ones, but the old ones in the back, they show you how to skin a squirrel. I guess that's gone out of fashion, but generally, that would be a good way to deal with those varmints as well. But that's not for everybody. What kind of seedlings or young plants do you have now? We have everything that's appropriate for the fall and winter gardens, so greens and onions and perennials and all kinds of things. If you want a full tour of that, in the first one of these I did 2 weeks ago, we spent an hour just going through the tables and talking about what's in season right now and what we have and about each individual plant, a lot about their needs and stuff too. So I would definitely encourage you to go back to that one. It's fall and winter veggie gardening, I think it's called, 2 weeks ago, and all of that. But yeah, onion family stuff, leafy greens from salad, brassicas, cabbage family stuff to still some medicinal herbs, culinary herbs, and anything that grows through the year. Yeah. Liza says she already has chicken wire down to keep the raccoons off, and the squirrel digs in the opening of the wire mesh around the plants. Yeah, persistent. So I guess maybe put the wire mesh closer to the plants or maybe cover around the base of the plant with something else. Like, I haven't actually tried it, but it seems like cardboard would be fairly decent for that. I don't see them working too hard to get under it. Maybe put some bricks on top of it. Just figure out what works for you. And hopefully, they do tend to be creatures of habit. So if they find a place they like to dig, they'll keep doing it. But if they get discouraged from it, you can maybe get yourself relieved of the problem. I find it's mostly a problem when you first plant. They like that recently disturbed soil. Once you've kept them off for a while and the soil's not so recently disturbed, it tends to be less of an issue. For me, man, it's a consternation because we'll plant a whole bunch of a seedling or transplant a plant like maybe into a gallon pot. We have like the most economic interest in those at the time because it's the thing we just put our time and work into, and of course that will be the thing that they're most attracted to. They're like, oh, you just spent a bunch of time planting this, let's put my own nuts in it. What's this thing you put in it? This annoying little plant, it's in my way. So the permaculture solution to that would just become a walnut farmer. Like if you live near a walnut tree, just put out a bunch of pots of dirt, you got free labor. Plant all their nuts for you. Squirrel got your corn. Oh my God. They would. Yeah. So, and I've also done things as far as like squirrels. One of the bigger problems I have with them is sunflowers, right? You get to the point where you got the sunflower seeds on there. They'll get up on there and they'll just eat the sunflower seeds right off the thing. Either that, if it's a really big head, either that or they'll chew the head off and just take it with them. Little jerk. So I've actually put paper bags over sunflowers, which sucks because then you don't see the beautiful sunflower, but it's enough to keep the squirrel off if you really try to get to those actual sunflower seeds. Eat, you know, and I scream like a banshee when I see him. If I see a squirrel, it's not welcome. I don't care if you got a cute fuzzy tail, and you go, nope, out of here. So yeah, but it'll happen. It'll happen. Um, and dogs are great too. I got a dog laying on the ground right there watching me. He's listening to all my advice, absorbing it very carefully. But having dogs around is really helpful too. I mean, again, the natural role of dealing with small varmints is having something that is, instinctually eats them, or at least just likes to chase them. Kanchan has a little puppy who's really energetic about squirrels, so they can be up in the trees getting our throwing our unripe fruit down, but on the ground during the daytime, if that puppy's around, the squirrel doesn't have a chance. So that's another possible solution. So I think we've talked about most of the animal pests. We've talked about, and snails are technically an animal too, snails and slugs. We talked about the rodents, from mice to rats to squirrels. Talked a little bit about birds. I didn't talk about the solution for birds, which is basically just exclusion. And it's easier to keep a bird out than it is to keep a rat out. You can just get some bird netting and build a simple frame, some bamboo, some wire. You just DIY it, make some sort of frame over the thing. It can be kind of permanent, it can be semi-permanent, it's temporary. But there's that bird mesh that you can get at hardware stores, garden supply centers. It's just that thin black plastic, little squares about that big. And that's generally enough to keep the birds off. They're not going to be as persistent as a rodent chewing through it or getting under it. So some sort of barrier. We also have some salad tables that we have a light shade cloth on that we use to keep them from getting too much sun and bolting too quick. But at night, we made it long enough that we can actually put it down over the sides too, and that keeps the birds out that will come in the morning. Again, birds are creatures of habit. You may get a flock that loves your particular patch, but once you've discouraged them, you know, that pattern is broken and they're going somewhere else. But when you get that pattern established, you gotta figure out some way to break it and get them out of there. There's other things you can do too, like hanging shiny things that blow in the wind, either like little pieces of mylar that would have got thrown away. I'm not suggesting you buy mylar for that, but you know, there's always some scraps of shiny things. Or a classic one is hanging CDs on a thread. That works to some extent. You know, um, some of them are persistent and they'll just ignore that stuff, but other ones, there'll be enough to scare them away. I also have all these plastic owls all over the place, and maybe that works. If it works, it might work for the rodents too, but it doesn't seem to do that much good. I've got like static owl. I got an owl that's got like a bobblehead that blows in the wind. And I've got one that actually has a solar panel that moves every so often from the little solar panel on her head. We used to sell fresh eggs, Lorraine, but we don't have so many chickens. Our flock is kind of downsized right now. I am intending to build it back up again to the point where we'll have a dozen a day. Um, but I got so overwhelmed with the rise in plant sales we had from COVID this year that I haven't had the time to actually reestablish our chicken flock. But next year, we'll probably have a dozen a day or something like that. We'll see if we can get to that. But even that's not a whole lot. So, yeah, we'll never be like a major supplier of eggs. We just don't have the space for it. And I don't know how much our neighbors would appreciate it if we took it to that level. Okay. Oh, and one more animal pest we can talk about would be deer. And down here in the inner city, deer are not an issue. If you're up in the hills or on the perimeter of cities where there's wildlands around it nearby, deer can be a big problem, and they'll just devastate a garden. There's some plants that are deer resistant, but generally, most generally they'll eat just about anything, and anything you like to eat, they will definitely like to eat. So deer, the only real solution is to have a real fence. You know, you can do like a 6 foot fence, better an 8 foot fence, really a 12 foot fence. A lot of times there are uh, ordinances code about how high you can do a fence, but you can kind of cheat that by like if it only allows a 6 foot fence, then you can have kind of poles with string and then more like hanging ribbons or something from it. So it's not actual fence, but it looks higher, looks taller. It doesn't have to be a solid fence, you know, it just has to be like some level of wire that the deer can't get through. And it's expensive, but once you put one of those in, that pretty much covers it. You can do things, and this works somewhat with rodents too. You can do things where you can buy predator urine, like coyotes or wildcats, and spray that around. Apparently, blood meal, which is also a plant fertilizer, also works sometimes for discouraging deer. They'll smell it and they'll think that a predator has been around there, or that's what the pea does too. Is like, oh, coyotes are around here. We'll stay clear. So that might work to some extent. I personally have not had enough experience with deer to really know. Other people have talked about like little bundles of hair and stuff that you hang around. I don't know. Sounds a little nasty, but those are repellent solutions that you could potentially try and see if they work for yourself. Um, Part of dealing with the inner city rat things, I actually bought gallons of coyote urine off of Amazon. Seems like a really strange thing to do, but I've done it. Didn't have the best luck with rodents, but maybe you'll have better luck with deer. I know that's a common thing that people use for that. So let's get down to insect pests. I've got a couple examples to hold up to the camera here. Hopefully you can see it. I was picking some of these for dinner the other night. This is a collared leaf. We're losing the sun. It's going down a palm tree, which is nice for my sunburn, but not so good for visibility here. Yeah, you can see that. See right there, these little clusters of, in this case, they're gray. I don't know how close I can get. You guys can see it. We're losing focus there. But yeah, you can see that. You see that kind of insect under there, especially in these little cluster kind of things. Some of them are kind of loners and they're out here by themselves. Some of them are in their little, having a meeting or something here. Um, those are aphids. And aphids suck the juices from your plants. A small amount of them is not that big of a deal. I'll tell you later why having so small amount of them might be actually a good thing sometimes. But a lot of them can really suck the life from a plant beyond making it kind of, kind of distasteful for you psychologically to eat. There's nothing wrong with eating aphids, and there's actually probably a lot of good reasons to. This is our culture here in general, not everybody here, of course, but is not as, prone to eating insects as some other cultures. And, if things get rough, maybe we'll need to figure that out. But most people don't like to eat bugs. And, I took I've got a sprayer in my kitchen sink. So when I was trying to eat something like that, I just spray it down real good and I knock them all off. And then it's fine. But if you get a lot of them on your plants, it just will make your plants unhealthy. So you want to be able to deal with it. Now, that thing I just said, spraying with water, is actually a really good solution out in the garden, too. Any kind of bug pests, sometimes you can just physically knock them off. As long as you're not tearing your plants off. But, you get a hose, put my thumb over it, and just squirt pretty hard, and you can knock them off. That's not a permanent solution, but they're not that mobile. And so, at least when they're in their wingless form, they're not. So, if you knock them off, a lot of them won't make it back up. So, that's a good thing that you can do. It's just a first level thing of just knocking them off. They're too small and there's too many to hand pick in this case. But yeah, that's first level solution. And aphids can be on a lot of things, but a lot of the things we're talking about now, um, and the things that are in season right now, which is leafy greens. Here's a collard. Over here, a bunch of dino kale behind me. Over here is a tree collard. Um, Leafy greens, not so much lettuces I found, but just things mainly in the cabbage family, which are cabbages, are collards, are kales, etc. Are really prone to aphids, and snails like them a lot too. We talked about snails. Liza says, I usually just squish those beige aphids on the collards. I actually thought they were the eggs of the cabbage caterpillar. We're going to talk about the cabbage caterpillar too, and that's another issue. I brought an example for that as well. And aphids can be different colors, just for the identification part. The ones I showed you were gray. Generally, I found on greens, they tend to be the gray ones. There's also black aphids that you can find. And I get aphids sometimes on tomato plants too, and I found that those tend to be like red, orange. And they're the same, I don't know if they're the same, but the same color as aphids that I see on milkweeds as well. A lot of people like to plant milkweeds for the monarchs. And milkweeds are a plant that I guess is just meant to be food because they tend to get covered with these orange and red aphids a lot too. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It made me think of the part I wanted to talk about with the colors of them. So they can be a lot of different colors, not just gray. That tends to be the common color I see on greens, just for identifying them. But yeah, they don't, they mostly won't be flying. They do have a flying stage, but you once you learn how to recognize them, you'll see them straight off. So yeah. So first solution is just physical, which is taking a hose and squirting them off, but that's a temporary solution. The next solution, which is also physical, is using soapy water and applying that. You notice that most of these were on the underside of the leaf, and that's where you find some of them. Sometimes they can be on the surface, but generally when you're applying things, you have to apply on the underside of the leaves. And you have a few plants you can use like a little hand sprayer like that. I meant to bring it out to show you, but I've got a 3-gallon sprayer that I use, a little pump sprayer with a sprayer on a handle and a hose that I apply things with because we're on a sort of larger scale here. But I would, if you have a big garden, I would definitely invest in something like that because it could be a little hard to do with just a little quart sprayer. Again, if you just have a few plants, that's good enough. But about a tablespoon of a simple soap with a quart of water is about the right dilution for putting soap on stuff. And a simple soap, I just mean one that would you don't mind putting on your food. So I wouldn't put something that's like heavily perfumed or dish soap that has some sort of like germicidal action. Simple soap like Dr. Bronner's is the go-to. A Castile soap is works pretty well. And sometimes the Dr. Bronner's ones, the essential oils that are in them, actually would be pretty good as a repellent as well. Like the mints or the eucalyptus might have an effect as well. But what the soapy water does is if you spray them on the get them on the actual insects, is it desiccates them and it clogs their breathing holes. Insects breathe not the same way we do. They don't have lungs where they respirate. They have holes, and I forget the names of them. There's a specific name for them. But the air goes into their body through these holes, and then the soap clogs those holes and actually suffocates them. It also can desiccate them as well. Liza asks, if you spray aphids off with water pressure from the hose, doesn't that disperse them in the garden versus eliminate them? Well, generally, if they get it onto the soil, they're going to have a very hard time making it onto the plants. They're not that mobile. The way the plants, aphids get onto your plants in the first place is they have, a certain part of the year, they have a flying stage. And in that flying stage, they'll find a plant, and then they'll land on that plant, and then the whole population gets born on that plant. They'll are able to give live birth then to aphids, and it's the whole thing about the aphid breeding is pretty fascinating actually, and I'll actually need to review it to get it down just right. But one part of it is like sexual reproduction, which is the flying stage, I believe, and the other part is this asexual reproduction where they basically can just live birth clones of themselves endlessly on like a every 3-day cycle. And those live birth clones are just birthed onto that plant. And so they're not like crawling off and then going onto other plants. It's possible, but they're just not meant to be that mobile. They can live their whole life on the same leaf of the plant and just keep expanding the population there. And then what they do is at a certain point, when they're about to exhaust that plant, or the plant's given up the ghost, is they go back into the flying stage. They'll go to the sexual reproduction part of their life and then make some of themselves that then go off into the world and spread. So that's how they spread, not so much by crawling on the ground. And then also, aphids are sort of specific to certain plants. So if you knock them off and they go into an area that has a different kind of plant, they may not be able to utilize that plant to live on. So you're not dispersing them. And, on certain levels, you don't need to worry too much about aphid spreading. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a bit too. But so, yeah, with the soapy water, it's usually just like with a Dr. Bronner's, I use about a tablespoon to a quart, or, you can do the math to take to a gallon. A gallon would be 4 tablespoons, which is probably some portion of a cup. Someone else who knows those quirky measurements can figure that out. But you can also use something like this, and this is more of a horticultural soap. It's a simple soap too. This is potassium salts of fatty acids. It's a little bit more expensive than the Dr. Bronner's, although Dr. Bronner's, man, Castile soaps can be really expensive too. But this is just one is going to work if you don't want to experiment. This is by Safer brand, which you're still seeing backwards, so it's a Refas brand. But yeah, so you can get it from us in this kind of thing, or you can just go to the grocery store and get it yourself. And this one will have a little book in the back with its dilutions for its thing. So that's the next level, is soapy water. The level I go to next, and there's a lot of things in between. A lot of people swear by, I make this cayenne, garlic, whatnot thing. And I've tried that. I've had mixed results with that. Usually my go-to is I'll usually just go to some form of neem oil. What is neem oil? I mean, some people know what neem oil is already, but neem oil is the oil from the seed of a tree in India. And they actually have done a lot of work there, Vandana Shiva and folks, to keep Monsanto from patenting the neem tree, which would have been terrible. But neem oil is a part of Ayurvedic medicine. You can find it in toothpaste and stuff. So it's basically harmless for mammals. For us, like I said, it's used in medicine, toothpaste, whatnot, but it kills insects, and it's also really good for fungus. So we're going to talk about it again when we get to disease. Um, Neem, it's imported here to the States in various horticultural forms or straight forms. You can use just straight neem oil. The brand I usually see it in is it's like a white plastic bottle with a black text. I forget what the actual brand of it is, Dynagrow or something like that. But however you get it, you can use it. You'll have to use a surfactant, a soap, to get it into water. And so the soap and the neem oil solution actually go well together because the soap will disperse the oil into the water, and then you'll get the effects of both the soap and the neem. And the soap is more of a mechanical kill. With, I said, it's like desiccating and covering their air holes, whereas the neem oil is, don't take me wrong when I say this, but it's more of a chemical kill. There's molecules in the neem that don't work well for the insects and kill them, even though it is an organic form. It's from a natural source. It's got reduced harm reduction using it, and that works. But I actually personally don't like to use the straight oil that way because I find it's kind of heavy for the plants. The plants also breathe through little holes, which I do know the name of those holes. They're called stomata, and they're generally under the leaves. They'll open and close depending on how much moisture the plant has available to them. But I find the oil tends to seems like it clogs those, and the plant is just kind of like, okay, you got rid of the aphids, but I can't breathe too well. And it doesn't kill them. They actually sell it in some nurseries as a plant leaf polish for houseplants and stuff because it makes them look a little shiny. Uh, but I like to use a horticultural formulation, and the my favorite one is this brand called Monterey, but they haven't been able to get neem oil lately. Their supplier is not getting it to them somehow. So I've moved to this other one called EcoWorks EC, which is again backwards for you guys. Sorry about that, can't help that, but it's just the one I have available to them. But it's exactly the same as the Monterey brand, where it's 70% neem oil, and then the 30% other ingredients are kind of like surfactants and things to break it up in there. And you don't need to use much of these. They tend to be pretty expensive, um, but this one says 2 teaspoons per gallon, which the other brand I use, which is the exact same ratio as this, was 2 tablespoons to a gallon. So somewhere in between there is the truth, but that's not a lot. This will go a long way at that rate of dilution, and I find it just knocks the problem out. The aphids, generally 1 spray, 2 sprays, they're out of here. And then, as we'll talk about in a minute, it also eliminates a lot of some of the other common issues you can get with greens. So I like that. But we are at the level now where we are using a pesticide. Now, a lot of people, when they're asking if something is organic, they say, oh, no pesticides, right? And I know what they mean is chemical pesticides on the plants, but there are organic pesticides too. And by organic, it means that the pesticide comes from a natural source and that it's not going to do lasting harm when it's in the garden. It will break down into something benign very quickly, but it's still killing insects. And sometimes that's a choice that you have to make. Again, you got your food outside, other things want to eat it. Sometimes you're going to need it to protect it from those things. But if you are making the choice to kill insects, you also need to be very aware that it does, where you spray it, because it'll kill your aphids, but it'll also kill bees, right? So I only spray neem on things that aren't in flower, because if they're in flower and the bees are visiting them, then I'm worried about killing the bees as well as the aphids. Now, there's also beneficial insects that eat aphids. Aphids do have natural predators, and if you have a lot of aphids on a plant, chances are you're going to have some of those pest predators on there as well. There's like wicked things like wasps who lay their eggs inside the aphid, and then the larva hatches inside the aphid, and like an alien movie, you know, it burrows around on the inside. Um, well, it burrows around the inside to nourish itself. Basically, that wasp is like giving its baby a packed lunch, right? And it eats it up from the inside until it's done, and it just bursts out of the exoskeleton of that aphid, and then goes off into the world and to do that again to another aphid. You know, and you can see that actually. They're called aphid mummies. You'll see these little exoskeleton things left with this hole in them that this thing has burst out. So if you spray neem, even soap, on a green, chances are you're killing some of those pest predators too. Now, sometimes you got to do that. Sometimes maybe you'll choose to leave some aphids somewhere so that you can help build those populations of pest predators. And that's just one example of a pest predator. You know, if you don't have any aphids, you'll never get pest predators. So it's got to be a balance. And then also, part of pest control is having diversity in your garden. If you've got a lot of flowering plants and you've got areas that you don't disturb as often as your annual vegetable garden, those places can be habitat for pest predators. Uh, Flowers with where the nectar is not too far down into the flower, called short fluted flowers, actually can be attractive for the adults who lay their eggs on the aphids, for instance. They'll go take a little sip of nectar to feed themselves on their journey, and then they'll go lay their larvae in the aphid. So, yeah, so part of pest control too is just sort of maintaining an ecology in your yard, and everybody doing a little bit of that. So having areas around or mixed in with your vegetables that have a lot of flowers, a lot of short fluted flowers, and things that attract. We have like a beneficial insect blend and a 6-pack of different flowers plant around the garden, and it can help. You know, it helps create that more complete ecology where these things stay in balance a little bit better. And when you do use a pesticide, you are disrupting that a bit too. And sometimes that's a choice that you have to make. So next, there's a lot more I could talk about, even aphids and ecology and pest control and stuff like that. But I got to move along. I'm trying to keep these down to an hour, and we're almost there already. But we'll keep going. This one will be a little extra long because generally this is part of a larger class, like a 2-3 hour class, where we try to talk about everything. And I was going a little bit more at length because I wanted to fill that hour, but I'm going to go a little over now because there's a lot of stuff too. This pest and disease is a big topic. We're getting that way. We're getting through things. See these holes in this collard green? This was probably cabbage caterpillars. And thank you, Susan. She says, wonderful explanation of the benefits of diversity and keeping balance with pests and predators. Appreciate you appreciating that. And that's a big part of it. You know, we got to talk about that. So when you see this kind of pattern, holes in the leaves, it's like these holes with these ragged chewed edges. You see these kind of little chew marks, but they leave the stems. It's called skeletonizing a leaf. If this thing progressed, it would just be the veins of the leaves, the stems left. So they're eating the tender leafy part from out in between it. I don't see one on here right now, but they're not worms, but they look like little green worms that are basically the same color of the stems of this plant. This one's actually a really good example of all the things we're talking about. It's got the cabbage caterpillar holes. It's got aphids on the back there. And it also has what we're going to get to next. One of our main subjects of disease is powdery mildew. But so the cabbage caterpillars, they come from the white butterflies that you'll see around the garden. We're losing the sun now. But generally, probably, I bet you at some point in this video, you've seen one fly past behind me. And some people mistakenly call them moths. They're actually butterflies. And you'll see them, and if you watch them and pay attention, you'll see that they're actually landing mostly on your cabbage family plants. Cabbage family plants, technically brassicas, used to be cruciferae because their flowers are kind of like a little cross. I guess that was a Christian thing, but the now they're called brassicas, brassicaceae, and that's cabbages, collards, kale, kohlrabi, Brussels sprouts, all those guys, and probably some I'm spacing on right now. Those are your cabbage family plants, and this butterfly has this thing with them, and it'll fly around. You'll see it land on them, and it'll lay a little egg, generally on the underside of the leaf. You'll see it's just a small little egg sticking, it's a little cylinder sticking out straight out from the leaf. And those hatch into these little green caterpillars, which are very cleverly camouflaged to be the same color as the green stems of the leaves. And they'll start really small and they'll grow bigger and bigger, and they'll do a ton of damage to your plants. So how do you deal with that? This is a pest you can handpick if you're out there and paying attention enough. You can look under there. If you get an eye for them, you can see them. It can be very difficult to see them, but you can get an eye for it. You can handpick them. It's kind of nasty. That's the first level solution. Another solution would be excluding the butterflies from them. They, on the commercial level, they use these what they call row covers. They make these hoops over the rows, and they'll put a fabric, which is usually some kind of plastic fabric. Rime is the name of one I know, where it's a fine enough mesh to keep the butterflies out, but it's not. It still lets a good percentage of the light in so that the plant can grow. That's a lot though to cover all your stuff with row covers that way. So yeah, generally what I will do now, neem that we talked about for the aphids will work on them. So it's kind of a one-shot solution because the caterpillars are an insect, and the neem will kill them just like it will kill an aphid. So that is that works. There is another specific solution too. If you don't want to use neem, this to you just looks like a little green bottle. This is also in the Safer brand. It's called Caterpillar Killer, and what it is it's a bacteria called Bacillus Thuringiensis. Short, his name is BT. BT has a bad name because of some ways that the genetic engineering is manipulating it. We can talk about that, but for organic gardening, it's actually been a tool for a long time because BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, this particular bacteria, is something that caterpillars naturally get, and they get sick from it and they die. And so they've isolated it and they breed it in some sort of substrate. And sprayed on caterpillars, it'll knock them out, but it's not harmful in other things. So it won't hurt bees, it won't hurt other insects. It's just specific to caterpillars. Now there are caterpillars you may not want to kill, right? If you have monarchs or Gulf fritillaries or Anna swallowtails on their various habitat plants, you'd want to be very careful not to overspray that onto those things. So every time you use this kind of stuff, you want to be careful. You want to do it with a lot of circumspection so that you're not harming things you don't want to harm. But that is a really important tool. Chances are, if you buy organic greens, they have been sprayed with BT because the farmer had to have some way to keep those cabbage caterpillars off of their crops, because you don't want to buy them with holes like that. And if you got a whole field of kale, it's going to be full of cabbage caterpillars. There's no way around that. Those guys, they are so good at finding those plants. I've sold seedlings at farmers markets where we're just in the middle of what's a street, asphalt, and I've got my little table on the asphalt with one tray that happens to be a cabbage family thing, And that white butterfly will find its way here in that urban environment to my one tray of 6 packs of greens. So they can smell it, man. They know how to get there. So, so those are the tools I use, either hand picking, neem, or in, certain situations, the BT will all work really good for those and knock them out. Or just like when you see a white butterfly, you're like, get out of here, chase it off. I've done that too. It's amazing sometimes when you know what things do, things that you would think were cute, like a squirrel, or beautiful, like a butterfly. You're like, no, out. What plants can deter cabbage white caterpillars and butterflies? Are marigolds and nasturtiums repellent? I don't think marigolds and nasturtiums are repellent at all. I think that's kind of a misunderstanding that, there is a thing where like heavily aromatic plants might confuse them and, get them out of there. If there is, I don't know if there is a pest predator for the caterpillars. I mean, chances are there are. Generally, short fluted flowers like marigolds provide a little sip of nectar for them, and they could lay it. But yeah, mainly marigolds and flowering things help with pest problems by being attractants to pest predators that then go help deal with the pests. Very few things will actually repel them. You know, Polyculture planting is a fancy word for mixing up your vegetables, not putting all your cabbage in one place, all your collards together in a nice block that's, very pleasing for us humans to have it organized that way. So mixing all your plants up can help a little bit. Having a bunch of flowers and things mixed up in there as well can help for the reasons I described. And so when the butterfly gets there to lay that egg for the cabbage caterpillar, it has to find them in various places. It doesn't find the mother lode all in one place. So that helps some. But I found that these pests are very clever, very good at finding your plants. Planting a marigold next to them, honestly, is not going to keep them away at all. And nasturtiums, I found, seems the way they work is some people think nasturtiums are repellent for aphids in a garden. I generally find my nasturtiums covered with aphids, with the black aphids. And so I think the way they do their job is they attract the aphids rather than so that they'll go to the nasturtium rather than some other plants because they don't seem repellent at all when they're covered with black aphids often. Um, yeah, so sometimes it's kind of like the telephone game, where you whisper in one person's ear and they talk to the next and it goes around. And so the telephone game has made it so a lot of people believe, like I said in this example, that marigolds are repellent to insects. But really, the first person who whispered in the first person's ear said marigolds help by creating a complete ecology where you have pest predators that then help with keeping other pest populations down. Can you also speak to leaf miners and chard before you go on to fungus? Yes, leaf miners and chard. Leaf miners are really hard to deal with. I don't have any chard right now to show you because my solution has basically just been not growing it during the warm season. What a leaf miner does, and they can be other things too, but on a charred leaf, you'll see this a whole portion of it just looks brown and dead. Eventually, it becomes most of the leaf. A lot of people mistake it for a disease. If you catch it early on and you look, you'll see it start as just a little tunnel through the leaf, and then it will spread to a larger portion. And what leaf miner is there an insect, again, who lays its egg, this time inside the two epidermises, the two inside the surfaces of the leaf. They like chard, they like spinach. That family, for those guys, is called the chenopods. And so they like chenopods. So that's chard, that's spinach. It's also sorrel is in that family, and there's some other things in that family. And so they'll lay their egg in there, the larva hatches, and it starts to burrow around between the two outsides of the leaf. And it'll do a lot of damage that way. It's really hard to deal with it too, with the soaps and the neem and everything else, because it's inside the leaf. So the leaf actually protects it from any kind of external spraying. So I have here at the nursery, oftentimes I'll I'll use neem on chard before it gets bad. And I think it being on the surface of the leaf can be a deterrent for the leaf miner adult, for which is some sort of flying insect. That I don't know exactly what kind of flying insect, but I know they're a flying insect. That that seems to help sort of prophylactically. But once you have leaf miners, there's not a whole lot you can do. If you catch it early and you see that little tunnel start, there's going to be a little larva in there. So what you can do is just squish it, and you'll feel a little pop. If you get the little pop, celebrate, and there'll be a little bit of extra protein in that bit of your leaf long term. So if you're patient and observant, and you're out there with it, you can go ahead and just pop the leaf miners as they come. A lot of people will just remove the infected parts of the leaves, but I find you end up removing most of your chard at that point. And and then you put them in a plastic bag and put them in the garbage so they can't hatch and fly out and do it again. But it used to be just a little kind of annoying issue where you'd have a few leaves getting this, and now it seems to be way more pervasive. I blame people growing vegetable gardens because now there's a lot more chard out in the world for the leaf miners to find. And yeah, but again, there is a pest predator that is that will manage to get through the surface of that leaf and lay its egg in that leaf miner larva. So I'm hoping that as actually more people grow vegetable gardens and we get more of a problem with leaf miner, that this pest predator will get to the point where hopefully it will keep it somewhat in balance as well and be less of a problem. Um, it seems to be mostly a problem during the warm season, and once it gets cold, if it gets cold in fall, winter, or early spring, then you don't get as much leaf miner. So what we're doing here at the nursery is we're actually planting chard right now for people to grow through the winter, because that chard is going to have much less of a problem with leaf miners. So think of it as a winter treat to help kind of mix up your greens. you know, Again, you can grow it in the summertime, but you're gonna have that issue, and you just got to deal with it, or just allow it. So yeah, that's leaf miner. They're a pain in the butt. No real easy solution for that except planting the chard and spinach seasonally. So yeah, there's other insects pests we could talk about. Luckily, in the Bay Area, we don't have too much of a problem with beetles and other things because we're not that warm. I think that's because we're not too warm. We don't get those kind of beetle problems and things. There's somewhat, there's a bean beetle that can make little holes and things sometimes, but I just ignore them. I never treat for that here. Um, there is an issue with mites, which is not an insect actually, it's an arachnid. One second. I actually haven't been selling catnip at the nursery lately because my catnip has had a problem with mites. And mites is in the spider family. I think you can see that. I can see it on my phone. Hopefully it's broadcasting to you in enough definition, enough resolution that you can see that. But see all those little pinprick white holes? They're not holes, but little pinprick white dots on that. Those ones are actually pretty big. They can be even smaller, and they'll be dotted all over the place. That is spider mites. And you're certainly not going to be able to see this right now. I don't know if we're going to go macro enough for that, but there's little tiny spider relatives under there, and they make little populations under the leaf. If you look real closely and your eyes are good enough, you can see them. They tend to make a little kind of spider webbing under there, not like a full spider web, but just you see this little webbing thing going on. Um, and they also, again, are leaf juice suckers. And a few of them is no big deal, but a lot of them can take the vitality from the plant, and the plant really suffers for it. They're really hard to deal with, but you can deal with them. The solution, again, for them is neem neem seems to work really well on them, but I can't seem to get them completely out of my catnip, so I'm just not selling catnip right now because I don't want to uh, give people spider mites. But yeah, if you look at them under a microscope, they're little eight-legged guys, and the thing that makes them really pervasive is they have a really fast breeding cycle. They can have a cycle that's like 3 days or something like that. And so you got to spray, and this can be the case with aphids too. If you have a really bad problem, you got to spray consecutively. So you spray like on a Sunday, and you'll get rid of a large portion of the adults, but maybe you missed a couple, and then there's some eggs that maybe the neem doesn't kill. And so you spray again on Wednesday so that you get the adults you missed and anything that's hatched from those eggs. And then you'll spray again the next Sunday to get the next round of things so that you've kind of really interrupted the breeding cycles and did it enough times that you've got a large portion of them. But some of these things breed fast enough that if you miss a few, they'll multiply exponentially. 1 second, folks. They'll multiply exponentially. It'll be almost like you hadn't done it before. But I don't get them on too many things. I tend to see them on catnip. I see them on passion flower. It's also a real problem in the cannabis industry. You get mites. People get mites in their grow. It's all over. So, yeah. Um, but yeah, so just look out for that. They spread by touching them, and some mites or some eggs will get on your hands or your clothing. And when you touch something else, um, son's taking our dogs for a walk. That's excellent. Hi, guys. Hi, doggies. We're going to the park. That's great. Yeah, so you can spread them, and touching another plant susceptible to them will you'll then have introduced mites. So you got to control for that. Anyway, we should finish getting through this because we're in overtime right now. The last thing I want to talk about is as far as the disease section, and this is the main disease that we're going to get here, is powdery mildew. There are other diseases. Most of them are on tomatoes. There's a lot of tomato diseases, and we could go all into that. Verticillium, fusarium, late blight. That's a long conversation. There's not too many good solutions for those. We can talk about that if you guys want me to. And then other things are like rots and molds. Not powdery mildew is different than a mold, but it generally has to do with things being too wet and not enough air circulation around them, and a root rot where you kept the soil soaked too long. There's no oxygen in there, and the plants tend to rot. But in a vegetable garden, besides tomatoes, which are the prima donnas and get all these other things, the main disease issue, which is a fungus that you're going to get, is powdery mildew. So I don't think you guys can see it. There's like a little white coating on the plant here. And it's not just like dust that's on here, but there's like this white patches that look like a fungus, and they're kind of wider in certain areas. It's kind of spreading. Here's some, I picked these earlier. They're getting a little wilted, but here are some dino kale leaves that have it pretty badly. This one has given up the ghost here. Hopefully you can see that in the sliding. But yeah, it's just kind of a white, starts in sort of a powdery whiteness, and then it gets thicker. And that is powdery mildew. And that is a fungus that populates on the surface of the leaf. And it has these little fungal hyphae, these little tubes that they stick down into the leaf. And again, they're nourishing themselves off the juices of the plant, and it depletes the vitality of the plant. Now, it's not bad for us if there's a little bit of it on the leaf or whatever to eat it. Luckily, there's no harm done. I've eaten plenty of it. I'm fine, I think. I'm fine. But it really can deplete your plants. And greens are almost always going to get it. Squash, anything in the squash family, which includes melons and cucumbers and such, um, they're almost always going to get it at a certain point. Uh, Snap peas, if you grow them at the wrong time of year, they're going to get it. And there's a lot of other things that can get powdery mildew. Once you learn to recognize it, you'll see it a lot. Doesn't mean there's necessarily anything wrong with your garden if you have it. It's like I said, it's almost certain at some point you're going to get it. Um, it, unlike other funguses, okay, I'm going to say this with a caveat. It's not so much about moisture. Um, Air circulation can help, but you can have a plant that's completely out in the open and can still get it. Air circulation and light are definitely good. If you have plants that are too crowded or don't get enough light, especially lack of light, you can get more of it for sure. We had a plant pathologist come teach at the garden once a long time ago, Dr. Robbie, a plant pathologist from UC. He told us that there was actually specific kinds of powdery mildew for specific plants. That the powdery mildew that a squash gets is a different species than the powdery mildew that a green gets. So that you couldn't necessarily cross, spread that powdery mildew from your dino kale to your squash plants or vice versa. Seems to know what he's talking about, so that's the thing. But it kind of doesn't matter because this stuff is ambient. It spreads by spores in the air. And in this bit of air right here, there's probably a bunch of powdery mildew spores that can opportunistically land on things. A lot of times if a plant's healthy, it won't get it. And by healthy, I mean a plant that's grown like at the right pace. It's got to have all the nutrients it needs, be nice and healthy and robust, and have its whatever immune system a plant has that keeps it from getting powdery mildew. But at the same time, if a plant grows too fast, if you fed it too well with nitrogen, then uh, its cell walls aren't going to be as thick, and it's going to be easier for the powdery mildew to infect it. So by healthy, I don't mean a plant that just grows monstrously green too fast. I mean a plant that has what it needs, but not too much, and grows at a nice pace where it can develop its immune system and its like oils and things in it that help it, or thickness of cell walls and all the things that can help it resist. But even regardless, there's some plants that are still going to get it. So there's a lot of things that can help with powdery mildews. I use it, have at least 3 in my arsenal for it, and the one I usually go to straight off because it works and it's going to help with these other things. It's usually on greens that are going to have aphids and cabbage caterpillars anyway, is the neem. Neem is great for getting rid of powdery mildews. Neem kills insects and neem kills fungus, and it knocks both of them out. Now, if you have a leaf that's had powdery mildew for a long time and it's got that white coating on it, you spray it with neem, that white coating is not necessarily going to go away. And it may not be active at that point, but it'll still be there. If it's small enough and early enough, you spray it, the leaf gets all glossy from the neem, and a lot of times you won't notice, or I mean, it looks like it's gone, and it may very well be gone at that point. But what I'm trying to say, in too many words, is if it's harder to get rid of it, or at least make it look like you got rid of it if you wait too long. So it's better to spot it early and spray it with that neem quickly. So that's one thing you can do is the neem. Now, when would you not want to use neem? The cases I wouldn't want to do it is if I have powdery mildew on a flowering plant that has bees actively visiting it, right? And that's mainly going to be the squash family things. The fancy word for them is cucurbits. So the cucumbers, the squash, um, the melons, all those. I'm looking over at the table where we usually have them, which is right there. Uh, so I worry about spraying them with the neem and then killing the bees that are pollinating those guys. I don't want to do that. Um, Now, I have had really respectable organic gardeners say that, well, if you spray them with neem late enough in the evening, the bees aren't visiting, and it dries by the time they're visiting in the morning, it won't hurt the bees. I hope that's true. So if you do use neem on squash family plants, do it late in the day after the bees are done, when the bees are, all back in their hive, wherever they're living. Then, spray it then. It will be pretty effective. The um, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, well that's the time you'd want to spray anyway. I found that if you spray neem on plants in the middle of the heat of a day, it can kind of hurt the plant a little bit. So you got hot sun spraying on this neem coating that you just put on. So it's better to spray neem in the evening when it's cool anyway. Um, any health issues with humans eating raw greens sprayed with neem? Taste, no, the taste is not great. Um, I don't think neem is harmful to humans at all. Again, it's used in Ayurvedic medicine. It's used in toothpaste. I would watch it for sure, and I would try to do it not too close to the time I'm actually going to harvest and eat it. If I do need to, I would definitely do it. I would definitely wash it really well. I mean, I wash my greens well anyway. But no, I don't think there's any real harm in it at all. I spray neem all the time, and haven't used a mask or anything for it because you got to wear masks a lot nowadays anyway. I'm not right now because I can't possibly transmit to you guys. But, um, it's pretty harmless to us. If I was a big bug, then I'd worry about it for sure. But I'm not a big bug. I do bug some people. But, yeah. So where we squash. So other alternatives for this is one, just, you know, tolerating it. Like a green lasts long enough that you probably need to get rid of the powdery mildew because a collard plant can grow all the way from like March till March of the following year. And that's a long time for it to have powdery mildew, and the plant will probably be very unhealthy if it's too long. But in another example, the squash it has a much shorter lifespan. And in the beginning, when the young squash is growing, it's not going to have powdery mildew at that point. And it's going to be later on when leaves are older. Those are the ones that are getting powdery mildew. So one of the methods on squash that people use is to just take off the older leaves before they get too bad. And there's always this growth point making new fresh leaves on the squash plant. And so if you have healthy enough of a squash plant, enough nitrogen soil that's got a lot of vigorous growth, a lot of times you can just not treat it at all, just remove the old leaves. And by the time it eventually succumbs to the powdery mildew, you will have eaten, especially a summer squash, you will have eaten enough zucchinis that you're sick of it anyway, and you're happy to let that one go. You can also have them grow in succession, where every couple months during the warm season you're planting new squash plants, so you can just pull your old ones out and have the new ones producing. That's another solution. For winter squash, a common misconception is winter squash grows in the winter. It doesn't. Winter squash grows in the hot season in the summer, just like summer squash. It's called winter squash because you eat it in the winter. It keeps. It's got the hard shell that you can keep it on your table or in your cellar. Places that actually have cellars nowadays, but it, you eat them then. So, but the point I brought up winter squash, pumpkins, gourds, and whatever, is that those actually take longer to ripen. And so that plant has to live all the way to the end of the ripening. So powdery mildew is going to be a bigger problem on a pumpkin or a butternut than it is on a zucchini or a yellow crookneck. The summer squashes, those are fast and they keep making them all throughout their lifespan. Whereas the winter squashes that actually grow in the summer, stay clear on that, it's like, 3, 4, 5 month process where the plant has to stay alive all the way to the end, and you harvest them all at the very end. So, anyway, long-windedly going on, one of the things I like to use for squash, if I'm worried about the bees, is potassium bicarbonate, which again is backwards here, so you're seeing brachyid. But it's potassium bicarbonate is basically baking soda, but it's not exactly. Baking soda is sodium bicarbonate. Sodium is bad for plants in large amounts. They need a little sodium, but salting the field could kill things, and that's actually going all the way back to the beginning of slugs and snails. Don't put salt on your slugs and snails to kill them, because you'll kill your plants as well. The Romans used to do that to the fields of their enemies so that they couldn't grow food after they were conquered. So they won't put salt um, on that. And for the same reason, going back to where we are now, baking soda is not good, but potassium bicarbonate, which is nearly the same thing, is the potassium is actually good for plants. That's one of their major nutrients that they need. And, thinking of it like baking soda, I bring up that analog because, it's basically harmless to most anything except powdery mildew. So you mix that, it doesn't take much. It's like a teaspoon to a gallon in water sprayed on the leaf. And it works in two ways. The potassium apparently disrupts the fungal cells and actually bursts them by changing some ionic thing in them and bursts the cells, the fungal cells. But the main way it works is it makes the surface of the leaves alkaline, just like baking soda is alkaline. And by changing that pH, it makes it inhospitable to the powdery mildew. And it's something you'll need to reapply fairly often, but it's pretty harmless. And at that point, you don't want to water the leaves because you'll be watching off your potassium bicarbonate. It's completely harmless to bees. You can put that on there. I would do it just at the point when the squash is going to start getting powdery mildew, because otherwise, if you let it go too long, it's going to have a much harder time getting rid of it, or knowing if you got rid of it, because even if the fungus is dead, the leaf will still look white, and a lot of its vitality will already have been taken at that point. So, yeah, for powdery mildew, you got neem, you got potassium bicarbonate, and then the third one I use is another bacterial solution. And it's instead of the BT, which is Bacillus Thuringiensis, this one is Bacillus subtilis, if you're going to remember that. But it comes in different brand names. The one I used to use a lot is called Serenade. I don't know if Serenade's available or not, but it's a bacteria that eats fungus, and so that's a natural enemy of fungus to get this bacteria. It's part of the balance of things, but they've isolated it and bred it, and then they sell it in this kind of nutrient substrate that you can mix with water and put on the plants. And again, that's harmless to anything but fungus. Hopefully it's specific to powdery mildew fungus, because there are funguses in your soil that you want and like. I don't think you'll eliminate those by using this. People have used it a lot. So yeah, it comes in different brand names. Serenade's the one I know. Yeah, it's a bacterial solution to powdery mildew, and that works pretty well too. So yeah, anyway, I think we pretty much got through this. I'm not sure what time it is now. We probably went about an hour and a half. If you have any last questions you're watching, this is your time to get them in. But that was a good overview. I'm sure there's stuff I forgot that I didn't bring up. Oh yeah, I had some of this tanglefoot here, which was back in the aphid discussion. When you have aphids, a lot of times ants will be farming them. Especially, this is the case on a citrus tree, right? Or there's various trees that will get aphids that ants use aphids like cows. It's pretty remarkable. They will place them on leaves. They'll protect them from their natural enemies. Like ladybugs is another thing that eats aphids. I didn't talk about ladybugs either. Remind me to talk about ladybugs. Um, and they apparently, if they stroke the aphid, or I guess the aphid does this normally anyway, it will excrete some honeydew from its rear end, and which is, it's, I guess, excretions from all these sugars it's getting from the plant juices, and the ants will then drink that honeydew as a food source. So if you have ants farming or ranching, I guess it is, your aphids, it can make it a lot harder to get rid of the aphids because they're protecting from the pest predators, but they're also continually reintroducing them, bringing them up there. So this is just like a sticky sap that makes a physical barrier from the ants. So you put this around the trunk of your tree. And usually they put something under it so you're not putting it directly in the bark. I don't think it hurts if you put it directly on the bark, but usually people will put some sort of ribbon or something there and then put their tanglefoot on the bark of the tree. And as long as it's maintained, like there isn't like a twig or something that goes on there that makes a little bridge for the ants, or too many ants haven't died in it to make a bridge for themselves, it'll exclude the ants from the tree so that they can't ranch the aphids and, you know, stay involved in your business with the aphids. So that's one I forgot to talk about back in the aphids. Uh, right on, Liza. This is very, very helpful. Thank you, Daniel. I've been using baking soda solution on powdery mildew. Also read the dilution of milk as a spray. I tried it once, but I didn't like that as well. Yeah, so I would advise you against using regular baking soda, the sodium bicarbonate, and finding a source instead of very similar potassium bicarbonate. That'll be much better for your plants than the baking soda. Last thing I want to talk about before we close up is actually ladybugs. A lot of people like come here, say, "Hey, can we buy some ladybugs?" And you can buy ladybugs, and it's not bad, but it's not usually very helpful for your pest problems because generally when they sell ladybugs at the nursery, they've come from a dormant state, and cool. They come from a dormant state, and when you release them, their first thing they do instinctually is they fly out and they spread all over the place instead of like hanging out on your plants and eating your aphids. Uh, you can contain them there if you put some kind of cover they can't get out of, and keep them in there. But the adult aphid also is not your most vigorous eater of, of the aphids. It's actually the aphid larvae, which are these, they're black and red, and they look really wicked. They're about this big, if that means anything over the internet like that. Um, and those things are voracious. And so ladybugs are great. Their larvae are even better. But the best way to get ladybugs is not to buy them, which buying them introduces more to the area, but I don't know how much of an impact that makes. It's actually attracting them to your garden. And again, it's planting lots of flowers. Will attract ladybugs, or having aphids. Having aphids is a great way to get things that like to eat aphids into your garden. Anyway, those are a few things I just, as I'm trying to remember, things I might have missed. But we're going to keep doing these classes. So if I miss something, we can bring it up later. We're going to be doing this every Thursday, 3 o'clock. If right now, this is the only time I can really fit it in my schedule. If at some point I can fit it at the time that works better with people, then that would be good. I can't do it too late in the evening because we're outside and it would be dark, at least this time of year. So hopefully this time works. If not, it's here on our Facebook page. You guys can watch it later. And if you had questions, you're watching it later, and you had questions that you weren't here live to ask me, just put it down in the comments. I'll be paying attention to those, and I'll be answering any questions that people want to put later so we can keep the conversation going. Anyway, I want to do this again next Thursday, 3 p.m. I don't know exactly what we'll be covering at that point. I don't have a topic in mind yet. If you have one, let me know. Otherwise, I'm sure I'll think of something. And anyway, I'll see you then. Thank you everybody for watching this. And again, we're here at Spiral Gardens Community Food Security Project, 2850 Sacramento Street, open for the sales in our nursery portion, which is like our bake sale, how we support ourselves and keeps ourselves from being grant dependent, and also helps us get all these low-cost food plants out into the world on a level that other nurseries aren't doing. We're open to the public on Saturday and Sunday from 10 to 5. Come down, visit me if you watch the class. Let me know. Say, hey, watch the class so I know. Meet people who actually watched it. That's always very cool. And then if you want to get hands-on, either here in the nursery or on the farm side, then the times to do that are Tuesday through Friday. Main window for that is noon to 5. You can drop in. You can sign up by, we have a volunteer sign-up thing, but I'm still kind of getting used to using that. So I would just email us at info@spiralgardens.org, and hopefully we'll get back to you and give the link for the sign up thing. But I know sometimes checking all the emails is like drinking from a fire hose. So if we don't get to that, don't feel bad. Just show up between noon to 5. Say you want to volunteer. We don't have the gates actually open, but you'll see people in here. As long as I'm not doing a class and I can't answer. If someone came right now, it would have been a little bit difficult. But yeah. And then a specific event that's ongoing right now is on Wednesdays. There's the Racial Justice Wednesdays. There's an event on Facebook where you can check that out and sign up through the. You can show up, but also it's good to say you're coming on the event on Facebook. Anyway, yeah. So thank you very much for hanging out, and I hope you learned something. That's the whole point. It's just trying to get the information out there, help more people, know what they're doing here, and I'm learning as we go too. If you have any tips or things that I missed, please put them in the comments, and I can learn something too. Anyway, I'll see you next week, Thursday, 3 p.m. right here. Thank you. This is Daniel. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.